Hi, this is Chris Hatala with episode 3 in Found in Fanslation, a podcast dedicated to the people making awesome things happen in the retranslation world of retro gaming. So, my guest today was a chief driver in the retranslation of Phantasy Star 1 on the original Master System. I'm so excited to have him here today. So, Maxim, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your site and why you like Phantasy Star so much.
Hi, I'm Maxim. I've been involved with Master System emulation stuff for 23 years or so. I kind of got into developing stuff on the Master System and hacking things around because one of the great things you can do with old games is they're kind of easy to hack because the assembly code is just really easy to get at. And so quite a few years back, I was looking for a bit of a project. I started working on Phantasy Star. Phantasy Star's a really kind of big deal game in history of video games, even if it maybe doesn't isn't as well known as a lot of people maybe think it should be. And there was a translation right there. There was a guy called Paul Jensen who produced a complete retranslation of the game from Japanese. And this kind of showed really how bad the original translation was for various reasons of not wanting to spend too much effort on it or just thinking, it's good enough, it's just a video game. But the original game, it kind of had a much more interesting script. It had a lot of kind of Easter eggs, little bits here and there, and it was really hard to convert that into English. So there was this great script there. There was the game right there, and I thought, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to sit down and look at all the code, figure out how everything works, and I'm going to make the best translation ever. And I probably spent, let's say, about 500 hours on that. Complete disaster, complete failure. I got a whole load of stuff done. It was kind of I enjoyed the work, but I wasn't getting very close to solving the whole thing because I was trying to just solve everything. I wanted to get a complete disassembly of that game. So then, a little bit after that, out of the blue, I got an email from a guy, and he said, "Hey, I've almost finished translating Phantasy Star, and I want to give the project up. Could you finish it off?" And so I kind of did. I took I took a lot of what I'd done from the previous project that helped me to finish off a lot of the bits that were missing, and then I started presenting it on SMS Power's forums. A lot of people were really interested in it. They saw what was going on, how a lot of the things have been solved. We had a lot of discussions. So, for example, the names of a lot of the items in the original Japanese, there's a couple of items you can get that increase your health points, and they had kind of funny names if you were Japanese.
Yeah, Rugalin and
Pellery mate, yeah.
yeah,
And then in the original translation, they went with cola and burger, which were just like the worst. And it was kind of because they had like a 6 letter limit or something on what they could call stuff. But to actually figure it out, to understand, oh hey, there's an energy bar in Japan called Calorie Mate, and so Pellery Mate was a kind of a takeoff on that, and it makes sense. And you're thinking, okay, that's great. How can I fit that in 6 characters or whatever it was we got it up to at that point? And so I ended up spending a lot of work just trying to get it the best it can be, because you can make it good enough. You could make it so you've done everything you can in the original restrictions, or you can go the extra mile and just blow the restrictions away and just do everything you can to make it the best you can. And I kind of wanted to do that. I don't want to make a half done thing where you said, oh hey, yeah, it looks kind of lame, but it would have been really hard to make it better. I'd rather say, yeah, I made it better. And we just kind of, I guess we're going to come on to the update version 2 that we're working towards now, where a whole bunch of stuff has been made so much better again. and I think it's going to be awesome.
Oh, cool. What are some of the big updates that you've been working on that are going to be in the 2.0 patch?
So one of the things that I did for 2.0 was there were a few bugs still there in the release that was there. Nothing too game killing, but I wasn't very happy about it. I wanted to go back to it. And so one of them was to do with some of the boxes that go on the screen with text in, and then when they wipe onto the screen and then they wipe off. And there was sometimes a little bit of corruption when I did that, just for a fraction of a second. So I went in and figured all that stuff out. And it occurred to me that after I'd done that, it was kind of hard work. There was a lot of dealing with memory management to make sure that you didn't reuse areas of memory for two boxes that would happen at the same time. After I'd done that, I realized that actually there was actually quite a bit of slack space if you organized it carefully. And so we could make some of those boxes bigger. And the big deal with that was that you could start widening things and having longer, better names. So the original retranslation, it used a kind of a two-line system, partly because the original Japanese game did that, where every item, like in your inventory or armor or whatever, had to be split over two rows. And those rows were, I forget how long, like 10 characters or something. So you had 20 characters, but you had to get a line break in the middle, and it was kind of restriction. You couldn't say Governor General's letter. It looked a little bit lame. Things were split across two lines. And I realized that I could just redo all the menus in the game, make it so they were wide enough to fit the English in. As a rule of thumb, English text for anything is going to be 2 or 3 times longer in terms of characters than the original Japanese. And so by taking this stuff completely apart and putting it all back together again, I was able to make the game look so much better in terms of the information you see on the screen, and just having all of the windows looking right. So you've got no abbreviations, you've got nothing cut off, you don't have funny hyphenated splits in the middle of a word because they were too wide to fit. And so I think that's one of the big things for me. And that was the kind of the big technical thing that kicked it off. But then a couple of people came along to give me other things that I could do, and it kind of snowballed a bit. So one of the things I didn't mention for the original translation, but I really should, was that there's a guy called Frank Cifaldi. He's a actually a pretty well-known guy. He's got a Wikipedia page. He's involved in video game preservation, and he's also a journalist. He writes for a lot of kind of publications, real magazines, websites, that kind of stuff. He came in on the original retranslation to give a kind of a treatment to the script. So he came in as a professional writer to take a script which, Paul Jensen had done a great job of translating from the Japanese, picking up a lot of the kind of nuances and little oddities in the way that the script was written. But like most of us, I imagine he probably isn't the best author in the world. He hadn't written it in a particularly authorial way. So Frank came along and he rejigged it a bit. It brings it a little bit further from just being a straight translation, a dry translation, into more of a story that someone's really put a lot of effort into to make it flow, and partly within the restrictions of the game as well, to keep the things within the scrolling box area. You don't want to have sentences that run on. And Frank came back for V2 to give a kind of an update to a lot of the script as well. He offered to do more there, so that's great. We've got some small changes to the script coming in. No, we're not changing the story, of course, but it's getting better. There was once I'd done all that work with the menus, it occurred to me that I could do something that I'd always wanted to do actually, which was to add a sound test into the game and some options on the menu. One of the things the first translation had, it had a slightly hacky way of switching between the FM and PSG sound. So in the West, we only had the square wave PSG audio, which is awesome, by the way. But in Japan, they had this FM unit that gave you kind of more realistic FM instruments. And so I added in a way you could press the pause button on the title screen, it would switch between them and restart. So I stuck in a sound test menu with an option for it, and you can play all the the soundtracks from the start, and that's great. And then some people came on and they said, hey, Phantasy Star got released on Switch, and they put in some things on that version to make the game kind of easier or less grindy. So you can change the number of random encounters with monsters, so you don't have to battle monsters continuously, which is kind of part of the original. It's part of the charm, stroke, flaws of early Japanese RPGs, I guess. That random encounters are a thing, and you're going to have to battle a lot, and it is totally random. So I put in some things to add in options for that, so you can choose to change the monster encounter rate. You can make it so your experience levels up faster. You can make it so you earn money faster. And these are kind of cheats, but they're also a way to play the game in 2020 that is going to be a lot less grueling than what you would expect to play a game in 1988. I think that's all good stuff.
Yeah, that's super awesome. I was always such a purist. It's like, oh, like the more challenging a game is, like that's really why I play video games. I don't play games to relax. I play to feel like I accomplished something, and etc. We just had like our first baby last year, and I I don't have the time that I used to have, to play like 40, 60, 80-hour RPGs when a lot of that is just fighting and just grinding and not you're not enjoying like the story. You're just pressing attack and item over and over again to get your character stronger. And I've mellowed out a lot as like a an elitist gamer that these things, these quality of life kind of changes probably are pretty vital to having the younger generations come back and want to experience like where these game series came from and not be frustrated since the kind of modern game kind of holds your hand, it kind of tells you where to go. It wants you to just enjoy the experience in general, I think. And that's really cool. I was going to ask if you guys were inspired by the Sega Ages Switch port with any of your changes. So I think that's really smart. That's really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't played it myself. I don't have the luxury of kind of similar reasons as you said. I don't have the luxury of playing a lot of games these days. So it's good to take consideration of that. And to be honest, it is true that you can be elitist about stuff. It's like, oh, you haven't played it on the hardest level, then you haven't really played it. But a lot of gaming these days is about story, and RPGs are really just the genesis of that being a thing for games. And if you experience a story, you've experienced the game, you've done it, you've been in the battles, you have had a chance of dying, you've played the game, whether you've played it on easy or hard. And I think that it's true that in modern times, it's right to not judge people for playing the game on a level that lets them get to the end of it. I mean, who would really want to play a game where you can't get to the end of it? You just give up. You don't even know what happens at the end. That's a terrible game.
Yeah, like I'm a big fan of the Shining series too, at least like the Shining 3 and, earlier. And I never played Shining in the Darkness, the very original one, even though my friends loved it in grade school. And just like a month ago, I played it with my game genie, played through it in one day. I turned off like random encounters, so I only had like the bosses. I just had to play like the vital story battles. And it still took me like 6 hours while I was like watching the baby basically. But it just made me like feel so good. It's like, oh, I finally played the first game that one of my favorite game series, came from. The art is really good, like the soundtrack is fantastic, and even though I didn't spend months, grinding, it just makes me happy, that I was able to play it and see the story. I'd imagine a lot of people, especially like maybe the PlayStation gamers, like the Final Fantasy remake just came out, Final Fantasy 7 remake. I know a lot of people that was their first RPG, and FF7's like pretty easy for the time. And the new one, like I'm playing, on easy right now, just to like kind of get through it and get through, so my wife can also experience the story. I don't want people to just think like, yeah, RPGs just like started in like the 32-bit era, or this is when they started. getting good, or even like the Super NES, like, oh, those are the first really good RPGs. Phantasy Star, I think, is the best story in like classic gaming. It spans basically 4 games, and the stories like interlock. My friend ended up playing Phantasy Star 1 on Switch, and then that actually got him into 2, and now he's finished 4 as well. You mentioned you've got a long, history with the Master System. I'd love to get into more about, what game systems were, really popular in the 80s in the UK. I've got a lot of questions about that we probably don't have time for. But how did you discover Phantasy Star? What makes you close enough to the series that you undertook these hundreds of hours to improve the game?
That's kind of weird, I guess. I mean, I got into Master System. It was just the first video games I ever had, but I got into it kind of late. I think a lot of people did. So I got into it in about '92. So the Mega Drive, or Genesis, if you will, was already around, but it was just crazy expensive. So I got a Master System and I just played all these awesome games. I got loads of them kind of given to me from my elder sister who had gone onto the Mega Drive, and I just really loved it, and I just kept playing it, and so I kind of skipped the later generations. So I never had a 16-bit system. I never had a 32-bit home system. I just kind of kept replaying it. But the funny thing is that back in the day, I hated RPGs. They were just so boring. I wanted some fun platforming game. But I only really came around to it when I got into emulation. And it was like, I mean, the first thing was, oh my God, I can download all these games. It's awesome. And then the second thing was to start kind of getting into the technicalities of it, learning, what the system did. And for me, Phantasy Star, one of the things that was kind of a big deal about it was that it was just one of the biggest games, even though it was really early in the system's life. And it had all these extra features. It had the save battery RAM, and it had this kind of 3D dungeon effect, and it had so much art, and the art was awesome, and the music was amazing as well. I'm a big Uwabo fan, and it was just this great game, and I kind of still wasn't that into playing it, but I just liked to experience it, and I thought if I'm going to tackle a game, I want to tackle this one because it's just huge. There's just so much stuff in it, and I want to figure out how it all works. And so I got into it bit by bit. I remember having a online chat with on the forums with about how the compression was done in the game to compress the artwork and the font, because people were trying to change the font and they couldn't figure it out. And I figured it out, and I wrote some little programs so you
Hmm.
could view the art in the game and you could recompress things and replace them. And it's like, hey, this is fun. We should hack more games. We should do things to them. And that's going to be a never-ending thing, really. There's the Master System library isn't that huge, but there's still a huge amount of stuff in there worth doing. And I think that we're going to continue playing with this stuff for many years to come.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's part of why I wanted to start this podcast, because I was always really intimidated to, like, I'm not a developer, and I just never had the patience for it. And this thing of like ROM hacking, that I started seeing all these romhacking.net patches and like retranslations. I just think you need to be a developer to to understand all this stuff, and I just don't have those skills. So I started this Phantasy Star 4 relocalization just because I wanted to change the planets' names that are mistranslated. It just drove me crazy that Palma is Karma, especially. One day I was just like, oh, I'm just going to look into this stuff. And fortunately, I didn't have to program like in hexadecimal. I didn't really have to do that much work because the disassembly was already out there. So I learned that, oh, if someone's basically disassembled the game, you could like just go into the code, and the HTML coding basically is like really really simple, and I could just write a word, and then the game will output that word as long as I like do it the right way, like kind of like WYSIWYG style. So was when you started getting into Phantasy Star 1 hacking, had someone already come up with the disassembly?
No, absolutely not. I mean, in those days, no one had really done much disassembly. The tools now are a lot better. So one of the things when you're trying to disassemble a game is that a ROM is just a whole bunch of code and data all jumbled up. So if you throw that into a simple disassembler, it's going to say, "Oh, hey, I've got these bytes and they look like this code, and I've got these bytes and they look like this complete garbage nonsense code," because that's not actually code. That's actually a sprite or a sound, a music track or something. And the disassembler can't tell because it's just looking at all the bytes and spitting it out. So if you do that, you just get like 200,000 lines of assembly code, and probably 150,000 of them are garbage, and you got to figure out which ones are good and which ones are bad. That's kind of where I started. Then some better tools came along a little bit that tried to understand the flow of the code, try and figure out which bits were never actually possible for the program to get to. So that's probably data. But those things weren't perfect, so there was a lot of manual work in there. And even when you've done that, what you've got is just a bunch of assembly. And if you want to figure out what does what, you've kind of got to go through and figure it out. And you do a lot of search and replace, renaming things, and you say, this memory address, that's actually the attack points. So I'm going to search and replace that for attack points. And then you just try and work your way through the code. And it's a huge project. There's a lot of really great disassemblies out there now that people have done. And it's one of those things that it's a huge amount of time invested in it. The tools are much better, as I say. You can get a disassembly out that has a whole bunch of things that it says, I'm pretty sure these are data, and all the rest of it I'm pretty sure is code, and I'm gonna give it all like nice names, and it can do a lot of kind of heuristic analysis on what it's got to try and sweeten things up a bit. But in the end, you still got to go through. You've still got no comments in the code. You've got no real names for any functions or variables, and you've got to go through and figure a lot of it out. And it's kind of fun. It's really a kind of I mean, it's kind of archaeology. It's kind of like these people kind of translating Egyptian hieroglyphs and stuff. You're figuring a lot of stuff out. You're trying to piece it together, and it's a
Yeah.
really fun kind of, well, for me at least. I'm sure not everyone. It's a kind of it's quite an absorbing, I think, intellectual effort to figure this stuff out and get into the brain of some programmer in Japan in 1988. And isn't it great? I'm getting into Yuji Naka's brain. That's a great place to be.
Yeah, I felt kind of the same. It's like, puzzle solving and it's collaborative. I have no idea how to even get started with this. So Vivify 93, who I hear is helping with the 2.0, doing some bug testing and figured out how to make Alyssa's hair brown in the in-game sprite. He was the first person to respond to me on the ROM hacking forums and just like introduced me to a couple people, and so things went there. And I had 4 or 5 people assist me to like varying degrees over like the course of the whole project. And yeah, it's just fun to like solve a puzzle, kind of accomplish something new. Yeah, so one of the other things I wanted to ask you, because you've taken on this huge project, retranslating this huge game that means so much to like so many people. The attitude that you went in as you're making the changes, and I know you weren't the main writer of the final script, but as you're putting all this together, did you feel like you're mostly doing it? I don't mean this in a selfish way, but do you feel like you were mostly doing it for yourself to create something that you wanted to play and you thought these features should be out there, or did you more think about like this game is kind of a historical artifact and I want to make something that the most amount of people will want to experience?
I think there's a mixture of things. In some ways, it's a bit like restoring a masterpiece. You've got this awesome game, and then you've got this kind of terrible translation. I mean, with the best spirit in the world, within the restrictions of whatever budget they had at the time. And then it's like I'm scraping away this kind of brown varnish to reveal the color underneath, and that's a great thing. And the other thing that goes with that is that I wouldn't do this for myself. I don't want to just do things for myself and then I have the precious thing and no one else can have it. That's dumb. Well, I want to give it to everyone, and I want and the best thing really is the feedback when you get it from people who will say, "Oh, this is awesome. I love this." It's great sometimes to just go and find like a YouTube video of someone playing it and just see, someone's doing this and like, I made this thing and now someone else is enjoying it, and that's really rewarding for me. And the third thing was kind of what became almost the mantra for the project as we kind of pivoted from this literal retranslation into this re-localization, was that we wanted to make this the game that was the best it could have been at the time. So we weren't going to do anything funny like rewrite it for a modern platform. We weren't going to expand the ROM to double the size so we could have lots more space for everything and not have to try so hard. We were going to make a game that you could totally take a Phantasy Star cartridge, desolder the ROM that's in it, put this one in, it'll work. It'll even load your saves. This is just the ultimate kind of perfected upgrade, and maybe not what it should have been because that would be expecting a bit too much, but what it could have been. And it's really great to think of it that way.
Yeah,
We're taking this thing. It's almost perfect, but it's got these kind of slight rough edges, and we're just smoothing it over and saying, "Look at this. This is this great thing." And it's almost like I'm giving a tribute there to the original creators who did such a great thing, and not just on this game, for all the games, all of the rewarding games that I've played. It's almost like I'm giving something back. I'm saying, I could just say, yeah, great, thanks, or I could say, it's great. Here's my fan thing that I've done to give back, and it's I think it's more mentally rewarding that way.
definitely. And I felt pretty much exactly what you said, even having like one person send me positive feedback and say, "Oh, I've like really enjoyed this," just made me really happy. And I had started my project mostly because I wanted this like little change to the game, and it just kind of snowballed. And as I got farther into the project, I thought more about might other people, want to see in this. And as I got suggestions on like, oh, could you make a version that has all the original magic names from the English Phantasy Star 1, stuff like that. I would be like, oh yeah, okay, let me figure out how to do that. And I would just spit them like a custom patch and stuff like that. I also wanted to ask, is the English translation for Phantasy Star 1 the same in America as it is in the UK?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sega didn't spend a lot of effort. There was a really only one English version. There was never any other localized version apart from Korean and Brazilian, if you want to get into those. But yeah, they just translated it to English for all of Europe and the US because yeah, they weren't going to go to much more effort than that. It's a lot of expense, and yeah, all those guys outside of the UK in Europe, yeah, they had to learn English.
Yeah, like I read a lot of people's comments, and working designs is probably my like favorite localizer, and the first two Lunars on the Sega CD are still two of my favorite games ever. And a lot of people, at least that I read online, feel like they went too far with their localizations. They've got like pop culture jokes. They would change character details every now and then if they felt like it fit the story better. I've always been of the persuasion as okay, like Japanese and English are really different languages. I feel like there's not one set way generally to say things, especially like more complex, feelings and thoughts, and especially with expressions. So we're all just doing like our best guess of what the Japanese, intended, and these fan translations, it's all our interpretation of it. And additionally, it's not like there's something like, oh, the Sega screwed up or Square's, screwed up with this translation or anything like that. It sounds like they pretty much had almost no resources when it came to translating these games, right? How did you debate how to handle like the item names and I guess especially the magic names in Fantasy Star One? I'm just like really personally curious to hear like how you guys handle that and like if you had like debates over how to translate, some of these weird things that there's not a direct translation for.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate. The debate was kind of rekindled recently because people are coming and saying, "Hey, I don't like the spell names," but you're not going to please everyone. So the original spell names, some of them are surprisingly tricky to translate. So I'm trying to think of a couple of examples. There's a one of the spells, I think it might be escape or something in the original English. In Japanese is something like rakasuta, where raka is like the start of the word for quick, and suta suta is a kind of a onomatopoeic word for running. And God help you if you try and do that in English. It doesn't make any sense at all. You can't do it. So what are you going to do? It's tough. There's another one which it's probably worth mentioning because it's quite contentious and a lot of people misunderstand it. I forget the Japanese for it, but it's like it's the word for translate, only some of the letters are backwards, that are flipped, are transposed. And so, and what this is a spell that lets you talk to the monsters, but it doesn't work so well because it's a little bit faulty. And so the way we did that was we decided to call it transrate, which is a kind of a Japanese misspelling of translate due to the R and L blending together in Japanese. So it's a bad translation, and that for me that was a great localization for it, and probably a good fraction of the feedback I get is, oh hey, you had a typo in that one, but it's totally deliberate. It's an imperfect translate, and that I think that was one of the better ones. There's the wind magic in Japanese is called something like hyun, which is a kind of it's a word that means the sound of a blast of wind. And I'm pretty sure there is no English word for that. You could say blast of wind, but that sounds terrible. There's no kind of whoosh or psh. Now, these would be terrible in a menu. So I think we went with wind on that one. But yeah, and in the greater scheme of things, in the story, there's a lot of things which maybe even not intentionally, the original writers of the script, they're writing it from a Japanese point of view. They're saying things in the context of Japanese culture. So there's some kind of givens there for the way that people talk and exactly what does it mean to say this thing to someone in this context. And if you just translate the words, you're never going to understand it. And if you live in Japan for your whole life, you might understand it, but I'm not going to do that. And so there's a lot of small details there. And if you just kind of do the surface translation, you're going to get the meaning, but it's not going to have the same feel as something that's written in the context of the culture. And so when you've got a bigger modern localization where they're throwing in pop culture references that aren't Japanese, they're doing that to give it that depth and to place it in a culture. And you could say you can't place it in that culture. That's not the culture it came from. You can't change the story, but maybe that story doesn't really make sense in a different culture. I mean, these are all nuances. There's not some giant blocker like people in Japan have purple hair and people in the US don't, and therefore you've got to localize the hair or whatever. No, but there's nuances in the way people talk. So in English, if you're going to be rude to someone, often it's very obvious because you're going to say something extremely rude. Whereas in Japanese, what you say in a situation can be very differently construed, even if the language itself is not in itself offensive, but the way that you talk to someone. So you need to beef that up a bit. You can't just take the thing where someone says something fairly mild and get the same sense of, are they being rude or forceful or whatever. You've got to beef up the language to capture that, and you've also a little bit got to take some liberties because you've got to do something with it. You've got to try and capture a sense. Is the mad doctor really mad? Does he sound like a mad doctor, or does he just sound like he's talking like everyone else in the game? Well, maybe he should talk like a mad guy just to flesh it out a bit. And it's not hard to do in the language as a native speaker of English. And there's probably aspects of that in the Japanese that are harder to pick up in translation. So, yeah, localization is a really wide spectrum of how far you go, how far you take it, how much you throw away the original and write it all from scratch. It was probably a bad idea. I'm sure it's happened once or twice. Versus making something that's just this, it's so uncompelling because there's no life to the words, there's no fluency to the story, and you've got to get somewhere in the middle to to make an awesome game.
Yeah, I feel like for me and like I don't know, like my personal preferences and like my personal writing style, I really enjoy so many of like the fan translations that have come out. Good number of like action RPGs and RPGs and things like that. But there every once in a while I hit one that I just feel like they were maybe trying to be a little too literal or like a little bit too faithful, and I don't think that should usurp basically just like good writing, just good editing and good writing and, making it personable and making it relatable because we play RPGs especially for the story, the attachment that we have to these characters, since it was tough in old games to flesh out these characters, give them a lot of dialogue for the most part, but RPGs could do that. And I want to be like too negative and like crap on all these like famous RPGs, but it's something that I feel like should be talked about a little bit more is like the quality of writing in games and not just like the amount of text or the literal story, like the Wikipedia story of like what happens, but the writing and speaking style being different between characters, all that kind of stuff. So I would never even have really thought that Phantasy Star 1 was that complicated verbally, I guess. From playing the game, originally, I never would have thought that there was that amount of depth in the script, especially just only knowing the English version of the Master System version. That's really cool to think about, like, oh, how did Dr. Mad actually speak in like the Japanese version? Is he crazy or does he sound like he fits in with everyone else? Can you think of any other examples? Just it was tough to translate the nuance of something that a character or an enemy says in Phantasy Star.
One that comes to mind, there's a village later in the game where the village is split into two halves, and you've got on the one half where everyone's telling the truth, and the other half where everyone's liars, and all the two halves have different ways of speaking. So in the original Japanese, they would use particular types of endings to their sentences differently between the two villages, and so to capture a flavour of that in the English, we went with a few different kind of styles of ending. So I think one of them, they kind of end all their sentences with questions. One of the things they do is they both say that the guys in the other village are liars. Obviously, one side is telling the truth and one side's lying there. Um, so one of them will say, "All the guys in the other village are liars, aren't they?" And then on the other village, they'll end all their sentences with an affirmation of to say. So rather than a question, they'll say something like, "The guys in the other village are all liars. They are." And it's just one of those slightly weird things. The original Japanese sentence endings weren't quite like that, but there was no obvious way of there wasn't a direct equivalent. We could have gone a bit nuts and I don't know, let half of them talk like hillbillies and the other half, I don't know, talk like Germans or something. But that would have been weird. So it was one of those things where you gotta have some leeway because there's no direct way of doing it. And what did the original in translation do? It just didn't bother. Just let them talk literally, and no one could tell the difference. But it's nice to have the little bit there.
I had in Phantasy Star 4, I don't know Japanese and I didn't have a translation of the Japanese script, but the Cutting Room Floor website has basically the entire story, compares multiple script revisions from the earliest English ones that have been leaked that are very literal to the final, and then it has notes basically saying for a lot of them, here's this line is still different, or explaining, oh, this literal line was closer to the original verb, but they change it to make it easier to understand, or I don't know why they changed it, etc. One of the weirdest things is that in Phantasy Star 2, the Dazorians just have like a weird accent that doesn't even make sense in the English version, which is all I have to go on. They're like darn it, like DERN, and they kind of talk like like hillbillies, like you said, but not really. It's super strange. And this one Dazorian bar owner is supposed to have like this really thick accent, so I really was trying to figure out like how do I do what it seems like the creators wanted to make like the Zorians like talk a little bit differently. How do they speak in the original Japanese version of Phantasy Star, and how did you change like their speech pattern, if at all, into English?
Uh, I'm not sure. I don't speak Japanese, but I have some kind of sensibilities a little bit towards it because I speak some other Oriental languages a bit. But as far as I can tell, the Dazorians are they don't talk too oddly apart from these villages where they're with their funny ending to their sentences. But otherwise, they talk kind of normally. I think they hadn't quite added that into the universe in Phantasy Star 1.
Huh. I wonder in Phantasy Star 2 in the Japanese how they speak. Yeah, I just had no idea how to handle it. And Phantasy Star is really tough, I think, for continuity because in English, all the translations that we got they didn't really seem to draw off of each other that much, and there's so many references to other games in the series that just weren't localized basically in our versions. Did you did you use anything from the original translations of the other Mega Drive games that came later, or anything from the PlayStation 2 remakes of Phantasy Star 1 and 2? Did you glean anything else from the universe that chronologically came after Phantasy Star 1, or in the remake? Did you pull any of that in for this project at all?
I would say not very much. We were trying to go off the original on its own and not be swayed by the later ones, partly because, frankly, the official English translations of the later ones committed just as many sins, but in different directions, as you said. A lot of these translations, the overwhelming sense you get from them at the end is that they had a kind of a that's good enough, it'll do kind of attitude to a lot of it because it it was good enough and it was acceptable at the time. But the if they were going to localize or translate or romanize the character names slightly differently across the series, which one are you going to pick? Well, that's kind of a pain. I mean, I guess we had a little bit of that with the character names. A few people would rather have a Tyron or a Tylon or stick with the original. I mean, that you can't please everyone, but we played with it a bit. We looked at some of the later ones. I think the PlayStation 2 one, it had these extra features which were some of the concept art and original materials kind of as extras in the menus. And so with some of that you could go back and see some of the original, artworks and maybe the artist's original translation or romanization of the name. And that could be good for trying to get some original intent because through a lot of this, maybe there was an original intent there, but it got lost in translation, literally. And it's good to try and dig it out. But I think the later treatments, the Fantasy Star 2, 3, 4 translations, they weren't great, and I don't think they were a great source. Plenty of people, let's say, who first played Phantasy Star 2 are going to say, I wish the retranslation had everything the same as Phantasy Star 2 as whenever there's something equivalent. But someone else is going to say, no, I want it to be like Phantasy Star 4 or whatever. It's not going to work. You need to pick something and go with it. And I don't think we're going to unify the naming of things in the Phantasy Star universe because we're starting with an imperfect canon. So I don't think that it's possible to match everything.
Yeah.
So just go with what sounds best to you. And I think the creator's original intent is a good thing to start with because that probably wasn't considered too much in the original English translations for any of the games.
Yeah, even like you mentioned, like Cune. It's like, oh, that makes total sense that you use a sound that sounds like the wind blowing in English. Like, oh wait, what's what's a good word for that? Oh well, I guess we'll just have to go off of Cune. That was in the American version of Phantasy Star 4, even though in Phantasy Star 1 it's supposed to be called Wind. Yeah, it's just Phantasy Star just seems like a unique little mess when it just comes to all these weird words and there's not an exact way to translate it, and all the official ones had different ways of doing it. So we're just kind of all off on an island. That was my original hope for my project, was to kind of link Fantasy Star 4 as well as I can to the other games. When it came to the spell preferences, once I started getting a couple emails, it's just like everybody has a different preference. There's just no one way to do it. Yeah, like you said, it's at the end of the day, you just kind of do the best you can.
One of the things that I was debating to try and address this, because as part of the process for the 2.0, I put a lot of work into making the easy to build the game, and it's just an automatic thing. There's no messing about. The source code on GitHub and continuous integration and stuff. And part of that was to make it so people can make other translations more easily because they can take this as a base and they just have to type new words in the box almost. There's some complicating factors. But one of the things I was thinking of doing was to say, why don't I just make a website where you can choose all the options you want? So you can have the spell names you want, you can have the options you want. If you don't want to have the cheats in there, you can have your own custom version. And then I realized I'm going to have a form on this website with like 200 options in it, and it's going to be implausible. So I think I canned that idea. You can't please everyone, so you may as well just please yourself.
Yeah, the closest thing I can think of anything like that is oh yeah, Sonic 3 Complete is what they call the project. And the game itself, they have a number of options for, like, oh, do you want the Michael Jackson tunes from Sonic 3, or do you want the PC versions of it? But they're more like robust changes, like changing the sprites and things like that. You go on their site and you click like, oh, I want the Sonic 2 sprite for Sonic, and I want like this, I want that. But yeah, Phantasy Star is all text stuff, which I would imagine would completely really hard to implement because you got things that are last X characters and then this and that wouldn't like mix together. How did you guys decide on Tylon as opposed to like Tyron or Tyrone or anything like that? Because it's just like such a weird kana.
Uh, I don't really remember. I think that one came from some of the original artwork. One of the basics of Japanese is that R and L don't sound any different to Japanese people. It's a single sound in the language. So an R and an L substitution is completely impossible to tell the difference. But I think some of the original artwork, maybe it was in the PlayStation 2 release, or maybe it was in one of the books. I think it had that in there, and we just said so. I think we just went with that one as the right thing. Yeah, it's just a name. I mean, it's a more original name than came out in the West, and it's I don't know. It seems an okay name to me for a hero.
Oh yeah, it's especially as if you play Final Fantasy games. I mean, the names of Phantasy Star are relatively normal for sure, and not too like out of this world or anything like that. Yeah, it's just interesting because it's like, oh, like Tyron or Tylon or Tyrone. It's like a three-way coin flip. It's, use whichever one they have a preference on. With these, variations in ways to translate things, did it pretty much go like you used Paul's original translation, which I'm assuming was available like in a text document or something online, and you kind of did your own thing with it, and then you had the writer take a look at it. So did you kind of have like a committee, like a small committee of people where you could talk about these translation differences, or was it more like, okay, the original guy, did his thing, you looked at it and made some decisions, and then the writer did his thing, and kind of like a chain?
It's a kind of a mixture. One of the things actually I was trying to do with this project was to do stuff in public. I'm a big believer in publishing your source, letting people have it and do things and maybe do things with it. We had a few further translations based on the original source release, but also a lot of the discussions are done in public. So we can go back and find them. I can go and search now and find why we said Tylon instead of Tyron, and it's there. And so Paul Jensen, the original translator, was involved in a lot of those discussions, and it was useful to have because you need a Japanese translating person. I think Paul has been living in Japan for a long time now, so he's getting more and more native and getting that kind of understanding that you get not just by learning a language but by living in the country. And yeah, so we would have debates, we would discuss things, but in the end, the Frank doing the writing kind of had the final say because it was his thing to make it a script rather than a translation. And the names just they're orthogonal to that. Some of the details of the nuances of the meaning, it was good to have discussions and pick that out. I'm sure we haven't gone over the whole script with a fine tooth comb and found all the details because there's probably more there than a single person could ever find and communicate to everyone. But yeah, we just talked about it in the SMS Power forums. Just say, hey, someone can say, why is it Tyron instead of Tylon? And then someone else can respond back and say, no, I'm pretty sure it is. There's this original artwork, or there's the sound of the Japanese doesn't sound like Tyrone, so it's not trying to be Tyrone. Yeah, and it's good to have it there. I mean, if you had some sort of private committee thing going on, you'd lose the information, and I think it's good to keep hold of it.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about that now because I had wanted to. I've never done like a let's play, and I'm not into like watching people play video games too much. So, but I was like, oh, I should do like a director's commentary, Phantasy Star 4, because it's like, oh, I did all this work and I had some awesome people helping me. I realize now it's gonna be almost 2 years since I started the project. When I go back, it's gonna be tough for me to think about, oh, geez, what's even in the original script? I can remember why I did this and why I did that, and I remember some conversation, but I don't have like an archive like that of a process of decisions. But yeah, that's really smart that you guys did that. I'm still pretty new to the fan hacking world in terms of people actively working on projects and seeing the process go through. But I wonder, I feel like I doubt that's like a really common thing from even just seeing like the Aeon Genesis, their website and how their work is set up. It seems like one guy mostly does it when he does these projects, and I don't see a lot of that group discussion around those kind of things. So that's really cool that you guys came up with that to put it all in the forums. One question is, it's probably obvious to people, but how is the best way for them to get a hold of the patch, and when is the expected release for it?
I think we're probably going to be releasing fairly soon. It was kind of delayed. I got caught up in another project just at the start of the year. May as well name check a little bit. So SMS Power has a birthday, and for this year's birthday, we released the rarest Master System game ever, which is it's not the best game in the world. It's a game for teaching traffic safety to kindergarten children, but I did a kind of a rush project to translate that starting in January and releasing in March. So absolutely everyone should go play Game to Check because it's an absolute experience and it's another translation. I haven't actually been able to release the source for that yet. We need to hold it back for a little while to try and keep it away from people making reproduction cartridges. But yeah, you can totally play it in an emulator, and you can learn how to drive in Japan. It's a great project. And then that was released for the website anniversary. So it was our 23rd anniversary this year. And so now that's passed.
Congratulations, that's amazing.
It's a great thing. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there at the start, but I love that we just have a website that's been around for 23 years and hasn't, sold out or fallen over or disappeared like a lot of the early internet stuff. And so I'm going to release that one shortly. I was hoping to get it out actually for the Phantasy Star anniversary in December of last year, but that didn't pan out. So yeah, I don't have a strong timeline for it, but I think I'm pretty much done with all of the bugs at the moment. Vivify 93 has been great for finding all the bugs. It's great to have testers. But yeah, I'm going to put that one out the door fairly soon, probably in the next week or so, and call that a 2.0. And hopefully, yeah, the first release of this was in 2005 or so, so we've got a 15-year update. So maybe sometime around 2035, I'll come back to it and fix something else. But hopefully, this will be done for now.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'd like to do too. At least, yeah, find a cheap copy of Phantasy Star, either in another language, or if I just happen to find an extra American card, and then put your guys' project on it, because that's how I like to experience fan hacks. It was another puzzle to solve, figuring out how to take the ROM off and program it and putting your own on. I mostly did it so I could learn how to put my Phantasy Star 4 patch on, a real cart, and I kind of went from there. So yeah, I'm super excited to play it, especially with those enhancements that'll help me get through it in a somewhat timely manner. I guess just to kind of like sum up, like what would you say to someone who's maybe like a big fan of like Super NES RPGs, or a Final Fantasy fan who, has never given the Phantasy Star series a look? What would you say to someone about the series and Phantasy Star 1, and like what makes it special?
I think Phantasy Star has one of the most original set of choices to start the universe. First of all, it's not really in a normal fantasy universe. It's in a medieval science fiction universe, which is kind of unique. And then it starts off with a female protagonist right at the start. And for 1988, that was pretty unusual. I dare you to try and name some more games with female protagonists that weren't Lara Croft. And it starts off right at the bottom, where you've got the robot police have just killed her brother, and she's off to gain vengeance. And then it kind of grows out the rest of the story from that, and the band of people coming together. I think that it's a lot less typical RPG story or typical fantasy story, if you want to compare more to like the fantasy books. And while it has rough edges, it's an early game. It's the JRPG hadn't been perfected yet, but it has a lot of the early characteristics. And so I think that it's a game it deserves to be up there with the first Zelda and the first Final Fantasy as one of the progenitors of a major genre. And maybe it's just kind of dropped out because of where the franchises went, but it's a real piece of history. It's a bit like watching one of the better early films, and you can kind of see so much of what came after came from this. You'll understand, I think, more of how games got to where they are by understanding the history, and this is a major part of it.
Yeah, it was an article in Game Fan magazine. It was like a really awesome like enthusiast magazine. Really solidified my love of Sega and the Saturn and even the 32X. They would every once in a while feature great games that were new before the magazine had even come out. And they did one on Phantasy Star 1. It was the first time I really saw screenshots of it. And I couldn't believe it was like an 8-bit game. Like it's so colorful, and I mentioned like the animation. And when I finally played it, and especially too when I found about the FM sound module, I mean, it definitely doesn't feel like an 8-bit game. To me, it feels like kind of world between 8-bit and 16-bit, and like a lot of TurboGrafx, especially CD games, I feel like fall under this place too, where it's not something that you're gonna see if you've just played, original Nintendo and then went on to Genesis Mega Drive or Super NES. It's this really cool thing also of itself, and when you finally play it, I mean, the animation is fantastic. The mazes still look like really great. I mean, the game looks better than Phantasy Star 2. I feel like to me now. Yeah, Phantasy Star 2 is a great, very melodramatic story, but there's something about the simplicity and yeah, just the plight of Alyssa, that just means a lot to me, and it's really cool to see how much the series means to so many other people to make all these awesome improvements and to work with others and just to help other people share this love that we have of this story and like this series. So, Maxim, thanks so much for hanging out and talking with me, and I'm really excited to play the patch on my EverDrive. So, anything else you want to add, or
Uh, no, I think I'm good. I can't think of anything else.
yeah, well, thanks so much. Again, this is Chris Hatawa, aka Galleon Unlimited, and this is episode 3 of Found in Translation, covering the SMS Power upcoming release of what's the name of the patch? It's just Phantasy Star Retranslation. What's the official name of the project?
Um, we kind of don't have a name. I think we'll go with Phantasy Star Retranslation Project. It was in its early days. It was the Phantasy Star 1 Japanese to English retranslation, but that was kind of harder to type. So PSRP is what it's called.
Okay. But yeah, thank you so much for putting this together. I hope other Phantasy Star fans and other RPG fans check it out, and it's awesome. So yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you next time. So